So if you're wondering what the best decks to play to climb in Hearthstone are, you came to the right place. So let's just jump into it. The first one is Token Druid, surprisingly enough, and I think it's absolutely absurd how strong this deck is. People really don't give it credit. And I think people don't give it credit because of the fact that it's super boring to play, or at least that's what a lot of people tell me. And because of that, people just aren't excited to play it. But if you're fine playing a deck that's super basic, and you just develop a wide board turn 5, make it sticky with a pump like Arbor Up, Pride's Fury, or Soul of the Forest, or Power of the Wild, if you're fine with just building a board, pumping, winning the game next turn, and having that be your entire strategy, this is the deck for you. It has a lot of things going for it. It has good draw, good early game. It could potentially go late game too with a giant combo. Let's just say you hit turn 7, you can Solar Eclipse, Arbor Up, double Lightning Bloom, Soul of the Forest, or something crazy like that. And next thing you know, you got a giant board that's really sticky and impossible to kill. So, keeping that in mind, the deck's also super cheap, and I think it is my #1 pick for decks to climb with if you're especially like a newer player. There are some other decks out there that I think might be better if you're a little bit more experienced. Spoiler alert, like Control Priest or maybe Control Warrior, but especially if you're like a free-to-play player or new to moderately experienced, this deck is absolutely perfect for you. So this one shouldn't really come as a surprise. Face Hunter is #2. I have been saying play Face Hunter for so long. It is currently the highest win rate deck from Diamond through Legend. Hunter is the highest win rate class in the game, and this deck absolutely destroys everything in its path. Most decks, like Shaman, Spell Druid, or Ramp Druid, Deathrattle Demon Hunter, don't have the healing or anything required to win against this deck. Most of the time, you're just going to win because they can't heal the damage that you're doing, which I feel is like kind of a problem in Hearthstone, and it's part of the reason why this deck, Demon Hunter, and Elemental Shaman are all doing so well, just because of the insane damage. But yeah, I think this deck takes advantage of that the best. There are other decks out there potentially that could do better, but I think this one is just the most well-rounded, and you don't need to high roll for it to be good. Like, I think Elemental Shaman situationally can be better, you know, like the 1-drop reduce. Let me just show you right now. Elemental Shaman, like, you could go the Kindling Gem into Arid Stormer turn 2 and like another Arid Stormer turn 3, or the weapon pump up your Wind Fury minion. Like, you can potentially have a better early game with the Elemental Shaman, but Face Hunter is just consistently so good early game with tons of 1-drops, good amount of 2-drops, tons of damage. It's just so strong. Okay, so this deck is pretty interesting because I think that Elemental Shaman is similar in power levels, but I think that Aggro Shaman is just a little bit better. Because people don't run weapon removal. So if you get Doomhammer, you can burst them down, and there's not really much the opponent can do about it. I will say that if people do start running weapon removal a little bit more consistently, it's very possible that just Elemental Shaman is better. But as of right now, based on the meta that I'm seeing, I think that Aggro Shaman is better. Aggro Shaman is a lot more problematic. They get Doomhammer out turn 3, 4, 5, or depending on, you know, like Lightning Bloom or Coin. Then they have one slow turn, and then they kill you over the course of the next 2 turns with Rockbiter Weapon and the Storm Strike. Not to mention the fact that they have decent early game tempo with Wailing Vapor, Cage Match Custodian, Wand Maker, Marsh Spawn, and a couple of other things to get them early game pressure. This is a really good deck, and I would highly recommend trying it out if you haven't already. It's also relatively cheap. You only need 3 legendaries, and I would say you don't even need Gidra or even Inara. You could replace them with more tempo-based stuff, like Guidance, I guess, to generate resources. Now we're coming to one of my favorite of the decks on this list, and that is Deathrattle Demon Hunter. I think that Deathrattle Demon Hunter is a very strong deck. And its only weakness is the fact that it's very board dependent. So if your board keeps getting wiped, you could end up losing the game, especially if you don't have any good Deathrattle minions in hand to pull out off of Razorboar or the Razorfin Beastmaster. I'm not saying that this deck is perfect, but I'm saying that this deck has a lot of good things going. It's got good draw with Skull of Gul'dan, good way of cheesing out extra, and also Tuskpiercer, ways of cheesing out things from your deck with the Death Speaker and Talon. N'Zoth for really good late game, Illidari for good late game, Utanis to get rid of an opponent's win condition if it's a minion, and then really good tempo going into all of that. Honestly, I think this deck is one of the best decks in the game. It's my personal choice for climbing just because I like it the most, but the other decks on this list are definitely fine as well. Okay, so the next deck on this list is Frenzy Rush Warrior, and the reason why I'm putting this deck on here is because I think that it's very, very strong. I think it's a little bit, just a smidge weaker than some of the other decks on this list, but the plus side is that because it's Rush, if you have a good hand, you can actually compete with all of these decks. You get Rush minions, you're able to contest the board. The only deck that this struggles against is Aggro Shaman, because you don't really have that many taunt minions. But other than that, I think this deck can do well into most of the other top tier decks. And you could do the old Rush Warrior variant where you don't run Surfang, you don't run Stonemaul Anchorman, you don't run Kresh. But I personally like this version more because it gives you a more solid late game, and you already still have the same good early and mid game because all of your minions have Rush, and essentially you can put pressure on the board while also controlling the board, which is pretty nuts. So overall, I think this is a very good deck. I am up in the air on whether this is the best version or not, but I think that it is. And let's move on to the last two, which are a change in play style. Okay, so now we have the control decks, and I think these decks are weaker on paper because, like, you know, win rate wise and stuff, but if you actually learn how to play it, I think these decks have the potential to be the best decks in the game because with the correct armor and the correct amount of healing and correct removal, these decks can actually beat a lot of the strongest decks in the meta right now. And because they're control decks, you can tech in cards like Acidic Swamp Ooze to help you against Shaman, and it doesn't actually hurt this deck at all. So Control Priest is a very, very solid deck. You have Mindrender, Elucia, and Mutanus for hand interaction to stop an opponent. You have N'Zoth with a ton of good minions as a late game proactive win condition. Some decent minions to apply pressure to the board, like the Light Shower Elemental, the South Sea Scoundrels, and then you also have just insane removal and healing to stop those pesky aggro decks like Face Hunter, Aggro Shaman, Elemental Shaman, Deathrattle Demon Hunter, and all that. And sometimes if you can discover silences as well for Priest, you can also stop Deathrattle Demon Hunter just with some cool randomly discovered cards. So overall, I think this deck is really, really good. It does require a lot of time to learn though, and yeah, I would recommend playing this one if you want a deck that can carry you and you're not too upset with longer games. The last deck on this list is Control Warrior. I really like Control Warrior. I think, sorry for the yawn. Now with the Acidic Swamp Ooze and cards like Scrap Golem, it can stop Aggro Shaman. You've got a lot of armor and good early game removal to stop, you know, Hunter and even Demon Hunter. And I will admit, sometimes you can get blasted by decks like Ticketus Warlock and Control Priest, because this deck struggles the most of any control deck into control matchups. Like if you put Control Warrior against Control Priest or Control Shaman or Control Warlock, you're probably going to lose. But I think that this deck does better against some of those other more aggro or mid-rangey decks because armor can be gained and you can overheal for a little bit, which that overhealing might be the extra health you need in order to win you the game in the long run. Now this isn't the perfect build. I've been trying out multiple different builds. I've been trying Silas OTK as well, one without Cthulhu and just running Rattlegore instead. There are a lot of different versions of this deck that I've been experimenting with. This is the one I've had the personal most success on, but the expansion is still early, or the mini set is still early and young. And I plan on experimenting a little bit more. So just know you could probably take out Cthulhu and run Rattlegore if you wanted, and it would be fine. Or you could try to run the Silas OTK with the Ash Tongue, and that could probably be very good as well. But all three of them have been performing very well. This one's just the one that is particularly the strongest in my opinion. So overall, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. If there are any decks I missed, I apologize. Sometimes I don't like putting the same class on here twice. I did with Warrior, just because I love Warrior. But like Druid, right? Primordial Druid is also very strong. So that's just one example. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.